Jojo McEachen, founder and CEO of Learner First. 30 plus years of experience as a teacher, a principal, a community leader, a whole system leader. She's a best-selling author, a curriculum and assessment designer. She is an inspiration to educators all over the world. I can't wait to talk with Jojo today. Adriano, let's go.
Phil, it is so wonderful to be with you again, and I'm really excited for our conversation with Jojo. But before we do start, how is the wonderful city of Sydney faring for you today?
Look, it's a little soggy, if I'm honest, Adriano.
That's just the Sydney disposition.
Look, probably it is, but I just wanted to say thank you for bringing your weather to my fair city.
I would imagine that the Bureau of Meteorology would point out that there's more rain that happens in Sydney per annum than it does in the glorious Melbourne, one of the most livable cities in the world. I thought I'd just remind you of that, Phil.
Let's talk to Jojo, hey?
I think so. Jojo, look, it's really great to have you on our Relearn Second Serve special series. I'm going to launch directly into our very first question, and that question is one that we ask pretty much all of our game changers, and that is, tell us a little bit about your personal story and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here, and thanks so much for the opportunity. My personal story and how I got here to be here today is, I guess I just have a passion for wanting to change the world. And I suppose you probably hear that 1,000 times over, but mine is probably not that different from most of those stories, in the sense that I just love people. And I really want to make a difference in the world, in the sense of, I believe that we all can. And I believe that every single person has an opportunity to do something. And for me, education is really understanding who you are, how you fit into the world, and how you can contribute to humanity. And I think from the very beginning of my life, my mother told me that I could do something good in the world. Mm-hmm. And she said to me from the day I was born that there's nothing I can't do. And I think having her, and then my father, who was also a school principal, and being one of 7 kids who 5 of us became teachers, I didn't really have a chance. So I had to do something in education. And then following on from that, I ended up going into teaching, education, into the ministry, and then becoming sort of an entrepreneur a little bit later on. It's sort of like I didn't really ever hesitate. But for me, it's about, I just really love people, and I have a belief that we all can do something, and there's nothing that's impossible if we choose to do it. I think sometimes we just get frightened that we can't. And for me, it's like just remembering that we can.
It's like becoming head of a department. Of a department you didn't think you were going to become head of, isn't it, Jojo? Do you want to tell that story?
Maybe I could tell that story. So I think you guys had a little bit of a joke with me earlier, is that I moved over to London when I was doing my big OE, and I went for a job thinking that it was head of department for PE, and I got into the interview, and the principal was saying, so for the 3rd, 4th and 5th form girls, you'll be teaching social and moral education and the major world religions, and then 6th and 7th formers, you'll be sort of, talking about, the moral ideas of what's going on for the world. And I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to be doing? How does this relate to PE? So I kind of thought, I better ask her that question. So how does that relate to PE? And she said, well, this is the head of department for RE. So I looked at her and squarely in the eye and said, so what's RE? And she said, she said, that's religious education. I said, well, shit, I can't do that. I said, I can't teach that. I went to a public school. I wasn't ever in a religious school. And she said, after talking to you for a while, I think that you're quite a good teacher. And I think anybody who's a really good teacher, they can teach anything. And I looked at her and I thought, actually, you're right. We probably could. If we're really good teachers and we can connect and we can have relationships with kids, we can do anything. And I figured out that I could do that. And I had such a fantastic time with the kids in the school. The only mistake I ever made was when I was walking down the corridor and I used to do this to the kids. Because in New Zealand, that's how we say hello.
Right.
That was our eyebrows. And they used to say to me, why don't you say hello to me? And I said, I am. And so I learned cultural differences are really important. Yeah. So apart from teaching PE and RE, I had a really great time with the kids there. It was fantastic. So I realized you can do anything if you set your mind to it.
There we go. That's the adaptive expertise and self-efficacy of the 21st century citizen.
Absolutely.
Jojo, Jeff Southworth, in his study of successful English leaders that he published with the CSE in Victoria about a decade ago now, talked about optimism as an essential quality for an educator. How do we help colleagues around the world who feel trapped and get caught in the cycle of negativity about themselves and their profession and the prospects for doing creative and wonderful things. I mean, I'm, you know, I reckon 30 seconds in a room with you would probably be enough to do that. But there needs to be something that we can equip school leaders with to inject that sense of optimism into common rooms and staff rooms all over the world.
Yeah, I think it's called remembering who you are. And I think a lot of the time we forget who we are. And I often get interviewed by government leaders now to say, can I, you know, will I work with them? And my biggest question I ask them, first of all, is do you know who you are? And do you know what you want? And are you prepared to put your own heart and soul into this work? Because a lot of the time what I find is that we've forgotten to remember who we are. And I think that when we know who we are, we can do anything, because so much of the time we're looking at each other. It'd be like me look at you, Phil, me looking at you, Adriana, and saying, I want to be you. I want to be like you. I want to do what you're doing, but actually none of us can be like each other. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of the work that I do is to remind people that each one of us is just as special as each one else. And we each can have something special to do and contribute. And so for me, it's just reminding each other that each one of us has something. And what I've got is something very different than somebody else. You know, I've worked with some pretty famous people in my life. And, you know, when I first started working with them, I was petrified. I was thinking, I could never live up to them. I'm just a little kid from New Zealand. You know, I was born in Gore. You know, it's a tiny wee town on the bottom of the South Island. And here I am working on this, you know, great big stage with these famous people. And I stood there for a while and was petrified. But once I realized that actually they didn't know much more than I did in some things, and I didn't know much more than they did in some things, I realized actually, hang on, let's just all start talking and figuring out that actually we can each contribute something to the world. So it's remembering who you are, remembering that we're all human beings and no one's better than anyone else. Nobody is. You know, we all do the same things. We all have to go to sleep at night. We all have to get up in the morning. We all have to put our clothes on. We all have to have a shower. We all have to clean our teeth, all of that sort of stuff. And then when we remember that, then I think it just rebalances us to say, okay, just get on with the job and think, what can we do to make a difference today? And what can we do to be a better person and make the world a better place? And it takes that stress off everything. And, you know, some people talk about the imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And that's similar to that kind of thing. And it's just get rid of that, because none of us are ever going to be better than anybody else if we decide we want to be like that. But for me, it's about just remember who you are, why you're here, what your purpose is, and what is it that you can contribute to the world. When you get over trying to be somebody else, then that's when you can start to shine and you can glow and you can be happy in whatever you want to do.
Oh, Jojo, I love hearing you talking that way, and I particularly love the purpose-driven stuff. And we might return to that later in the conversation. That reminder that no one's better than anybody, you know, and then talking about the intrinsic worth of every human being and the dignity that they can and should carry with them is absolutely inspiring stuff. At the same time, you're doing some crazy, interesting things at the moment. You know, you're the CEO founder of the Learn First. You're a fellow at the Salzburg Global Seminar. You're on the executive committee for Karunga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills. Mm-hmm. And you're a member for Partners for Youth Empowerment. You're a global and co-founder NPDL. I mean, you've got lots of fingers in lots of pies. If we were to ask you to identify one thing that you're doing right now, big or small, that you're engaged in that has the potential to be a real game changer in creating today's learning for tomorrow's world, what would that be, Jojo?
I think the most exciting thing for me at the moment is my work around contribution. When COVID hit, I was flying back from Australia to the States, and I was on the plane and I was going back and I was thinking, how can I help the world? And I know that I'm not very good with blood, so I couldn't be a doctor. I couldn't do any of that kind of stuff. And I thought, what can I do that really can contribute to the world? And I was thinking about all of the work that I've done so far is around sort of thinking about what is it that we can do as a system. And I do a lot of work at that sort of level. And then I was thinking about what can we do in the classroom and how could I help people think through what difference could they make at home, at school, online, in any different way that they possibly could. And at that stage, I thought, I've got to bring some of these great big sort of ideas that I hold way out here, right down to the ground and really bring them into life. And I was thinking about my concept of contribution, which really is around, you know, understanding who you are, how you fit into the world and how you can contribute to humanity. And then connection. How do you connect to yourself, your community, your family, and know your purpose in life? And then knowledge. What knowledge do you need to be the very best person you can be? Not something about standardized knowledge or curriculum or anything like that, but the knowledge you need for you to do your work, to be your person. And then the competencies. What are the competencies you need to learn and return? And I was thinking about those 4 outcomes that I've been really looking at as I've worked with all of the countries that I have done the work with and the systems that I work with. And I was thinking, how does that fit into sort of like a neat sort of a way of doing things? And I thought, that's the contribution curriculum and a contributive curriculum. And so I've designed like what I've called, sort of pulled it together and tightened it up and said, if we were to do that in a school, if we were to do that in a family, if we were to do that online, how would that look? So I think right now I'm really excited about the fact that I've actually created a way of doing that at home, online, and at school, where we start to think about who am I, how do I connect, what do I need to know, and what are the competencies I need to be able to learn in return. So I've kind of taken these really big concepts and really nutted them right down into ways to really think about it from an individual all the way back up to a system level. And then following on from that, sort of thought about, so what does a teacher need to be able to do that? So what are the skills that we have to shift into, and how do we do that in a way that's not so huge? Because I think sometimes we try and do too much. And so what I've kind of tried to do is really make it so simple. So then if those are the outcomes we want from contribution, how does that look in a classroom? So creating that picture for what does it look like and giving some ideas around that. So doing the how piece. And then what would this teacher's skills need to be? How do we shift from sort of worrying about all the other stuff that we've been spending too much time on that hasn't really made any difference? And then what's the design tool? So I've created a design tool that's just a 1-pager that I use for kids, teachers, districts or systems, countries, whoever wants to use it. And then creating a change team concept that can be done in a classroom, a school, a system, whoever. And then also coming back to the outcomes at the end about meaning and fulfillment is the new wealth. And then contribution is the only way to earn it. So that's sort of the culminating theme that I've been using all the way through, that if we want to shift away from thinking about, this whole sort of competitive world that we live in, and we know that that actually hasn't worked because look at the state that we're in, how do we actually get to that meaning and fulfillment? It's through contribution. So I think my excitement at the moment really is around how do we teach people to contribute to something? Because when we move out of ourselves and give to other people, that's when we start to feel good about who we are. So to me, that's the most exciting bit.
What's really interesting listening to you, Jojo, is so much of what you're sharing with us today is consistent with the work of A School for Tomorrow, particularly around our graduate outcomes. And one of those particular graduate outcomes centers around the notion of being a responsible citizen. And what I get from you here is that if we support young people in developing the necessary competencies, not only to explore themselves and place, but particularly the other, once they kind of unlock their true north and their possibility, they can be so much more for other people. And they can make active contributions to the community. What I'm also hearing you share with us is that they are going to do that through leveraging the new knowledge base, which is emotional competency.
Yeah.
Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about how we would go about measuring social emotional competency in a school context? Because we know schools, unfortunately, and systems love measuring everything, right?
My favorite topic.
Yeah. And look, there is some place, of course, for measurement. But if we are to really help these young people unlock their inherent possibility through leveraging their emotional competency, what could that assessment really look like?
Well, for me, it's about measuring what matters. So one of the first books that I wrote was around making the important measurable, not the measurable important.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what that talks about is a system that we designed, which is called authentic mixed method assessment. And really that just centers around the fact that there are multiple ways we know when we're successful and multiple ways that we can look at it. So for a lot of the time, we've been just taking 1 or 2 pieces of information and making big judgments about kids based on that. Now, there's no other profession in the world that would ever dare do that. And I think about, my story that I often talk about is that you imagine when you run to the doctor, you're late. You're 10 minutes late. Mm-hmm. Your hair's all a mess because you've been in the rain and you dropped your purse and everything and you're racing, your blood pressure's up and everything, and so you're hot and you're flustered and everything. When they take your blood pressure and they see it's high, they don't say to you straight away, based on that one indicator, you need open heart surgery tomorrow. Do they? They say, let's get a range of tests. Then they also say, how do you feel? And they take into account that. So they look at multiple indicators or multiple pieces of assessment, and they synthesize that all together, and then they ask you to help them make a decision about what's best for you. Now, that's what I talk about with assessment for education as well. What I'm talking about with authentic mixed method assessment is to say we need multiple pieces of information, and then we need to include the child, because this is about them. And that can be done from the day they are born, not, we don't have to wait till they're a certain age before they can do self-assessment. And they can be included in that discussion about them. And then we synthesize all of that together and say, so what? What does this mean for my next piece of learning? So I talk about multiple pieces of information. They have to be, they can be synthesized together to make that decision. So what I do is I talk about, when I'm working with any system, I say, so describe what it means to be successful for you. What does it look like? What's the new success look like for you? Let's describe it along a learning progression, and then tell me what would be the multiple pieces of information that we would need for you to prove that you're successful. Now, the most exciting thing I've discovered, this is just so exciting for me. Sorry, I get really excited. I'm a bit of a nerd like that, but I get really excited about this because, like, when I wrote the learning progressions for new pedagogies for deep learning, I truly didn't believe they would work, because how could a single assessment across a whole range of different countries work? The reason they worked was because we described a concept. So we described, say, for something like collaboration. Each country had different pieces of assessment that they used to synthesize to say where the kids got up to. So what I learned there was equity is when kids can show what they know in their way. That's the new assessment. Show what you know in your way, not in the way you guys tell me to show it, not in the way I tell you to show it, but in the way that you want to show it. That's when we can say that's the new way of learning and assessment. So social and emotional learning might look different for you than it does for me, and that's actually okay. So you might describe what it looks like to be, self-understanding for you is different from me, but I can describe what it looks like. I know who I am. I can say I know who I am. You can say you know who I am, but you might have different assessments to prove it to you, and I might have it to me. What the difference is that we can describe it together and talk about it. And we can say, what does it mean to go further up that assessment scale?
Yeah, I love this notion of a learning continuum, and that's what you're basically sharing with us, where the starting point is the desired outcome, the end result. And in one case, it could be self-actualization. In another case, it could be contribution, whatever it might be. And then on this learning continuum, we're allowing the young person to kind of plot their journey over a period of time of their growth and their achievement. So much about what you're sharing there is at the heart of the notion of self-determined learning. And even if we take it a step further and be kind of self-paced, anytime, anywhere learning. These concepts are familiar to you, to Phil, to I, and to many of our listeners. But we also recognize that the vast majority of the educational system, this is still very foreign to them. Or as a minimum, it's very frightening to them, because it means they have to give over control. It's less compliance in its traditional sense, and more over to the empowerment or and supporting the intrinsic motivation of the learner. How do we then support teachers to move from their kind of weddedness to teaching to the exam, where the exam now is actually determining the assessment more often than not, and then determines the curriculum? How do we help them move from that exam paradigm, that standardized test paradigm, to one of true empowerment and self-determination?
Two ways of doing it, and you can choose whichever way you want to do it. But the first thing is we have no choice but to do it. My bottom line is we have no choice but to do it, because the world is in such a state that we don't have a choice but to do it. So the first way I do it is that when I talk about that mixed method assessment, one of those pieces of assessment is the exam, can be the exam. And that can be included as part of the assessment. And then, so therefore what you're saying is that we can have some of those quantitative pieces of information can still be a part of that. And it's still, I'm not saying that we don't want kids to be have that academic rigor still in there as well. So I integrate both social and emotional learning with academics. So that's one of the ways I do it. So therefore, as people are learning how to do this process, I show them that you can have content, because it's very hard to think deeply about nothing. You've got to have some content in there as well to actually do this kind of work too. But the content that you might choose might be more related to what the student's desire to learn is about. So that's one of the ways you can do it, but you still can have that content there. The second way that you can do it is to really think about when you're doing it, that teachers can do it for themselves first. I have set, whenever I write learning progressions or continuums, I do it adult version first. And I do it with the adults first so they can experience it first. So they can have that actual experience too. Because like when I talk about self-understanding, most of us as adults, we've forgotten what it's like to think about who we are because we're so busy in our worlds that we don't remember what it's like to think about us. And I can tell you, every time I've done a wellbeing session with adults doing these learning continuums or these learning progressions first, there's a set pattern.
Yeah.
20-year-olds to 30-year-olds start crying and they say, I've forgotten I don't know who I am. I've wasted all these years at school and I don't even know who I am. 30 to 40-year-olds like, I haven't got time for this because I've got to look after my kids and I can't be thinking about myself. 40 to 50-year-olds like, okay, well, I've got to pay for my kids' college and university, so I'll get round to this. 50 to 60-year-olds are like, yeah, well, my kids are going off, so yeah, I'm about ready to deal with myself now. I might have some time for myself now. And your 60 to 70-year-olds are like, yeah, this is great. I can do this now, except I've got to go and get a hip replacement. So it's sort of like, there's we haven't, we're wasting our lives. I think we're wasting our lives. So let's go back, and teachers, I say to everyone, let's go back to saying, who are we? Remember who we are, and let's learn about that ourselves. Go through this experience first as teachers and leaders in education ourselves. Remember what it's like to be us. Remember who we are. Have some fun with learning again. And then once they do that themselves, then what's so remarkable is that then they can do that with their kids again. So
it's
different ways.
Jojo, listening to you talk, there's such a richness there, and so much of the research that we've been doing over the last decade is just some hearing awesome stuff coming out. I want to pick up on this notion of purpose, practice, and identity. That, and we know this with teachers. We know that our identity gets caught up with our practice, and our practice subsumes purpose. And quite often we go into the profession. I was talking with a group of teachers from the great city of Melbourne, Adriana, yesterday.
Great place.
And we were having a conversation about why they went into teaching to start with. Yeah. And once we got through all the official sounding stuff, it came down to, I got into it because I just loved it. I just love helping kids and I kind of want to make a difference. Fairly inchoate sorts of things to start with. And then the development of a sense of purpose a little bit of time after that. And then it goes into practice. And then once it gets into practice, it stays there, and then identity gets formed based around I am what I do rather than I am who I am. I'm going to put to you one of the significant challenges I think that I've seen over the last 2 decades, and that is the shift to teachers being creators of curriculum rather than consumers of curriculum. And when it boils down to it, what we hear from teachers who really struggle with this shift because it's requiring them to change who they are because their practice is changing is, number one, I don't have time. And then when you get them down to it, number 2, I just don't like doing this stuff. I don't like online. I don't like digital. I went into teaching to be in a room with people, to connect with them in a space. How do we help teachers to unlock all of this sort of rusted on? It's not that people are poorly intentioned. Teachers have got awesome intentions. It's how do we help them to pull it all apart and re-engineer?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think that we acknowledge that there's a moral injury going on with teachers in schools right now. That I talk about a dissonance that's going on. So at the moment, we've been asking teachers to do things that are not morally right. And I have to say that really slowly because I hate saying it, but it's not morally right what we've been asking teachers to do, to teach a curriculum that doesn't meet the needs of our kids. It meets the needs of some kids, but it doesn't meet the needs of every child. And what's happened is that we've said you have to teach this. And then what we've done is we've layered on things on top, on top, on top, on top, on top. And we've created what I call a moral injury for teachers. And so what they've done is they've now protected themselves because they don't know how to get out, and they don't know how to get out of that now. And I absolutely understand the distress that they are in because they are now being judged by the results of the kids in their testing that is not acceptable anymore. And then the principals are in the same situation, because if their teachers don't teach the kids in this particular way, and then they don't pass the exams, it's a vicious cycle. So for me, it's all of the layers of the system, the policymakers, the researchers, and the practitioners. We all have to stop the madness, and we have to recognize that what we've been doing has not been working for all of our kids. If we take a look at the mental health results that we're getting at the moment, we take a look at the academic results, you can see almost a matching of results climbing. So what I talk about is that we have to peel back, and we have to say, this is no longer okay, because what we're doing is not working as a whole society. We have to go back to some of our Indigenous values. We have to look at what actually works for our Indigenous kids. We have to look at what works for different groups of kids, and we have to start saying, these are the things that are the principles of education and learning that actually work, and start using those again. And I talk about relearning to how to design learning again with our kids in mind, because what we've done is we've gone for mass education, mass teaching, mass assessment, because it's the easiest way to do it, to see a return on our investment from a government point of view. And that is no longer acceptable if we are trying to really understand how to succeed and go further in our education systems. So I have no blame for teachers, but I don't have no blame overall, but I think we actually understand now what the situation is. So we do have blame if we keep going.
So that picks up on that Indigenous wisdom too of telling truth, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
We have to speak truth into
Yep.
into the situation we're seeing, and recognize where that is. I have a similar thing that I want to ask you about, which I think our students get caught up in. And again, this isn't their fault. It's just the world that they're in right now.
Yeah.
You used the language of earning a place earlier, which I love. I get really excited about that. You know, we talk about a pathway to excellence, 4 questions: who am I? Where do I fit in? How do I best serve others? Whose am I? It's a journey of self-awareness, of relationship, of service, and of vocation. And earning your place is really important in that. It's a very old-fashioned sort of term. It runs completely countercultural to the world that kids are presented by social media, the media at large, the way in which the world works, which is a world of entitlement. It's a world that teaches them to complain about deficit rather than to work from strength and to earn what they can in and around it. It's a world that teaches them that gratification is found in me, when of course it's not found in me, it's found in us. And as you said, contribution earlier. How do we help kids who are caught with this? I think that I would describe it as a moral dissonance as well too. Kids, how do we help them free themselves and get to a better place where their world is defined by their selflessness rather than their self-centeredness?
I think the first part is to recognize and to speak truth, and tell the kids that. Like, tell them that we're struggling. Tell them that we haven't got it right. And I made a decision when I turned 50 that I was going to start telling the truth. And it sounds really silly, because people say to me, I've been really bit of a truth teller my whole life, but actually I haven't, in that sense. I haven't told the kids the truth either. And so now I'm saying to them, okay, so we're struggling with this at the moment. Like we're trying to figure out how to get the education system rejigged, because actually we know you guys have got really great ideas, but we haven't allowed you to help us figure this out. And the other thing I do is I'm now working with my elders. I'm now going to my, like, I'm Ngāi Tahu, I'm Waitaha, I'm Ngāti Momoe, I'm Māori, and I acknowledge that my elders have much more knowledge and information than I ever would have ever had, and I never listened to it when I was younger. And I now wish I had. So I think what do we have to do is we have to listen to our Indigenous people. And I've often said that our Indigenous hold a lot of the answers if we would allow them to speak, and if we were to listen to them. And we have to do that because they have so much knowledge about what we can be doing differently. And we have to acknowledge that. And so for me, it's about go back to our roots, go back to who we are, remember who we are, remember why we are here. And we have to model that for our kids. We have to teach them to remember that that we're human beings, that it's not me, it's we. Not me, it's we. And that we have a responsibility for each other. And if we don't model that, and if we don't model that in our staff rooms, if we moan about our kids, if we don't model that in the way we talk to each other, if we say negative things about each other, if we don't catch each other on that, if we don't do the right things in how we talk to each other, the way we speak, the way we assess, the way we design learning, if we, all of the things that we're doing right now, they all keep adding up. The kids see everything. I think, when I, growing up with Māori values, every single person has a place. Every single person has something that they can add in value. But we've taken that away by saying you're not good enough if you don't get to this particular level in an academic way. I talk about circles, and people who listen to me, sometimes they laugh at me and say, what circle are you relying on to tell you that you're a good person? Here's an academic circle. Here's a family circle. Here's a friend's circle. Here's a social circle. Here's a whatever circle. Here's a something circle, whatever. How many circles do you need to prove to you that you're a good person? And what happens is that in our school systems, we're only letting that one circle show. That academic circle is the only circle that we're allowed to be successful in. So in our schools, we have to start saying these other circles are just as important. So it's like moving into that space of let's start saying that other things are as important and start modeling it.
So it's really clear to me, listening to this conversation that you've just had with Phil, and so much of what the premise of Relearn Festival is about, and that is that we're at a crossroads. Yep. And that we can't sit back and wait for the evolution to happen to us anymore. And that to create change, we must do something, because let's face it, change is a verb. And driving the transformation of our kind of K-12 education systems needs to be led by educators designing new learning models and leading the changes taking place across the field by imagining a path forward to futures that most cannot see. Mm. If you were to have an opportunity to have every school leader right now listening to this particular podcast, what's the one bit of advice that you would give them to start this evolution?
I would ask each school leader to sit still for a moment and remember who they are. I would ask them to take my self-understanding learning progression and sit there and figure out where do they sit on it, and ask themselves what evidence do they have for that. And remember that evidence isn't a test. Remember that there's lots of ways of getting information, and then be true to who they are. Be their best self. Be their very, very best self, because their best self is the best leader that anybody can be.
Yeah, I think this call for courageous leaders is definitely a way forward, and one that often I know that Phil and I have spoken about ad nauseum in reference to. There are so many leaders that are so well intentioned, but often allow themselves to be hardwired by a system, and not realizing that they are the system.
They are the system.
And they have the real power to make the change.
Yeah.
My final question to you is this: what do you think the world needs right now?
What do you think the world? I think the world needs to remember that we are all human, and that we are all together in this. That we're all human, and that we're all together in this, and that together is the only way out of this.
I love that. I think it's as simple and as complex as that.
It is, yeah. And the only other thing I would say is that no one is coming. Yeah. No one is coming. It is us. We are the system. It is us. We are the only ones who can make this difference. And if we each remember who we are, and that we can each contribute to this world, then this world will be absolutely brilliant.
Jojo McEachen, you are a lovely human being. You really are. And the wisdom that you shared with us today, which is both esoteric and practical at the same time, which allows us to ground our own sense of the good that we can do in the world with how we can help kids achieve their potential and help them to belong. Yeah. And that whole notion of a whole education that you're so passionately committed to. There's so much to learn from all of that. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and share all of what you're learning with all of the listeners and the participants in this wonderful festival of learning. We wish you well. And we'd love to have another chat at some point because there's so much to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you both too. It's been a real pleasure.
The Game Changers podcast is produced by Oliver Cummins for Orbital Productions. It's powered by schoolfortomorrow.com and circle.education. It's available on Apple Podcasts, on SoundCloud, on Spotify and on Google. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, subscribe, like, you know what to do. Let's go.